I was a spy for the United States of America. My boyfriend, who's known me for 27 years and just found this out about me, has started calling me Natasha, which I actually like. And it makes me laugh. I worked for the National Reconnaissance Office before you could even call it the National Reconnaissance Office. The public couldn't acknowledge it, and I couldn't acknowledge it. I used to have a really hard time explaining what kind of a security clearance that I had. But with what has happened in politics in the last several years, it's very easy. I had an SCI, top secret clearance, which is the same clearance that Donald Trump had. The difference is that when he was elected president, he got it automatically. That was not the case for me. I went through a 6-month extensive background check, signing away many, many, many of my privacy rights. I agreed to have a tracker put on my car. I signed reams of paper, giving them permission to talk to friends, family, neighbors. They talked all the way back to my teachers in first grade. I was 24 years old, just out of college, and didn't have any idea what I was getting myself into. So as I waited for 6 months for my security clearance, I sat in what we called lovingly the leper colony. It was a building far away from the building that I would ultimately work in, and it was where everyone sat who was waiting for their clearance. We didn't have a lot to do. I read a lot of novels, and I drank a lot of tea, and sometimes I got to draw by hand on a drafting board a schematic for a board that was being created for the satellite that I was working on. I used to listen to my co-leper colony inhabitants who had been there longer than I had talk about who had done the worst possible thing that might keep them from getting a security clearance. I will tell you that I did not have my first beer until I was in the second semester of my sophomore year of college. I was a good girl. That's all changed, but that's a whole nother story. So I'm sitting there listening to my coworkers talk about the worst things that they've done. And the conversation went kind of like, well, do you think if I tried cocaine one time, that would keep me from getting my clearance? I immediately thought, well, of course it will. The response back was, oh no. In this day and age, if you haven't tried cocaine, you probably won't get a security clearance. Well, I was thinking, oh my gosh. Now I have to worry about not getting a security clearance because I had never done coke. I traveled on temporary duty. It was a 6-month stint in Florida. I was the only woman. Another big challenge. I traveled covertly, which meant that I couldn't fly directly from Colorado to Orlando, Florida. I had to take a crazy trip there so that if someone was following me from Colorado, they would have a hard time following me. And once I arrived in Orlando, they would have a hard time figuring out where I came from. Another part of that was that we had to pay for our trips in cash. We were not allowed to pay in credit cards because that could be tracked. It was before the internet, and the only options for travel were either going to an airline or going to a travel agent. And so I chose to go to a travel agent. So plane tickets were pretty expensive back then. And I was given an envelope full of cash and directions in which I was supposed to fly to Orlando. My first trip, my envelope was very full. It was $1,200 in 20s. And I was to fly from Denver to Chicago to Dallas and then to Orlando. I went into the travel agent and said, please, I need a trip from Denver to Orlando, but I need to fly through Chicago and Dallas on my way. And please make the connections as short as possible because I don't need to really stay there. I just have to fly through there. For someone who's trying to not be suspicious, that felt awfully suspicious to me. Once I arrived in Orlando, I needed to rent a car, but I was not allowed to use my identification. So in the envelope with the cash was also a little blue card that I was instructed to take to the Avis counter, and they would know what to do with it. I did, and they did, and they handed me the key to a car as well as another envelope. I got to my car, and when I opened my envelope, it was another map. It was a map to Cocoa Beach, Florida, and a bungalow on the beach. So I drove there. I was a little nervous about what I was going to find. And as much security and as much training as I had before I went there, I was actually kind of surprised that I wasn't given a secret knock to use when I knocked on the door of the bungalow. Anyway, I knocked on the door, dragged my suitcases, and went in, and there were two men from our program security team in there. They proceeded to put my bags up on the table, open them up, and go through everything. I couldn't have anything that identified me as being from Colorado. I couldn't have anything that identified me by name. And it was kind of weird having men go through my suitcases, to tell you the truth. That was just one of several strange things about being the only woman on this temporary duty trip happened. One of them was, as part of the TDY, we were given a per diem. And so it was $125 a day for food. We stayed for free in a beautiful two-bedroom, two-bathroom condo on the beach in Cocoa Beach. Who could ask for anything more than that? But the TDY, I found when I would go with the gentlemen, they would always go to happy hours at local bars. At that point in time, if you bought 2 drinks, you could have free appetizers, and that was how they had their meals. So I got into the routine of going with them and having meals and eating for free and having my cash left over. What I didn't know was that they were using the cash after they dropped me off to go to strip clubs. There is a lot more to this story, and you'll be able to read it in my memoir that's coming out later this year. Thank you.